little explanation of multiplying and dividing fractions. It kind of builds on some of the properties from the first, but there's a little bit more to the steps. The whole key is that you need to be able to factor the fraction. If you can factor the fraction, you'll be able to divide or multiply. And so I want you to think about just basic arithmetic. When you multiply, if I'm going to multiply 2/3 times 3/4, okay? People always say, "Can I cross multiply? What I would suggest that you do is think about it as 2 times 3 over 3 times 4. Don't think about any cross. You can actually cross reduce, but this is not a proportion. You're not doing proportion. So I can cancel anything out that's a common factor, and I get 1/2. Now some of you will cancel right here, right like this. That's fine. Okay, but don't say cross cancel or cross multiply. You're not cross multiplying. You're cross reducing. If I am dividing 2/3 by 3/4, I multiply by the reciprocal. The same is true when you're doing algebraic fractions. So this would be 2 times 4, 8 over 9. There's no cross reducing that can happen there. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like algebraically. I'm going to do just some of these problems. You can do some of the other ones. So first thing is just to double check and make sure that you know whether or not you are multiplying or dividing. So I'm going to start out with number 2. Double check. I'm dividing, so I know I'm going to be figuring out what to multiply x minus 7. So I write that as a fraction right away. And I need to do my factoring. So I look at this thing and I say I know that factors. And factors into x minus 2, x minus 1, whichever way that you learn to factor. And this I can write as -1 times x minus 1. Now you're going to see what happens oftentimes when you get in the middle of attacking this. You forget that we were going to go ahead and divide. So what you may want to do right from the start, instead of writing it like that, go ahead and take the reciprocal, take this extra step, and just rewrite the problem as a multiplication problem. Okay? So when I look at that, I have x minus 7 or 1. Now I'm just doing the same thing I did with any kind of other multiplication, and we did a little multiplication first semester, and I did this in algebra. Now I want to see if I have common factors, because essentially when you're multiplying fractions, you can make this one big fraction and just know we're doing that. If you think about it that way, you won't get yourself confused. Okay, so however you decide to simplify, x minus 7 is good. I'm going to rewrite this as -1 times x minus 1. This factors into x minus 2, x minus 1. Now I can cancel stuff out. So now we've turned it into basically one fraction like we just did with the algebraic fractions assignment, and we can reduce. So x minus 7 over x minus 2. Okay, so that's a division. And I do division and multiplication together because they're the same thing. Okay, let's go to number 4. It's multiplication, so I don't need to worry about flipping anything. I don't need to do that as my first step. So I'm going to look at what can I do to factor. I'm not even going to look over here. I'm just going to, what can I do to factor? Just like I want to reduce this as much as I can. So I can take an 8n squared, and it leaves me with 10 minus n over 3n, and I'm multiplying by 1 over n minus 10. And I like to write the binomials in parentheses even if they aren't. Go ahead and add those in there. Okay, so n minus 10 and 10 minus n would cancel if one of them had a negative. So I would usually change this Now it's n minus 10. So my n minus 10's cancel. Now I just have to reduce this fraction, negative 8n squared over 3n. Because remember, multiplication is just like turn this into one big fraction. And now I can reduce. This is a first semester question. So there's a little bit more to multiplication and division. Let's go on to number 6. It's division. So I'm going to start out by making sure that I write the reciprocal here, because I need to multiply by this reciprocal before I worry about any factoring. You don't want to, there's a lot of little places you can mess up details. You don't want to be lazy and mess up that way. Okay, so now I need to factor. And this is another place when I talked about this in the last video where I think about cheat factoring a little bit. And when I get some factors from one of these, I think they're going to be in the other. So again, what I'm going to do is just make this one big fraction. And now I'm going to factor each individual part so I can reduce. Now, some people like to put this in the middle of their page and factor up and factor down so they can cancel out. It's up to you. You just have to have some kind of a system. So I can take a 9r squared out of here. And that leaves me with r minus 5, which makes me think there's going to be an r minus 5 somewhere else. I know this factors in the easy way. R plus 6, r minus 3, because 6 minus 3 is 3. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. You can use your Xbox, guess and check, whatever method. I'm going to work my way around here. If this is negative, this is positive. Guess and check method says both are negative. And I got my r minus 5. Thought that would happen. Double check. Negative 4, negative 5 is negative 9. Now this one's a little bit rascally. So I'm going to take out a negative 1. And right up here I'm going to rewrite this as r squared plus 3r minus 18. And you will notice when we did that, you get the same thing that was up here, so those just cancel out. R minus 5 cancels out. 9r squared negative 1 times r minus 4. So a couple ways you could write this, your final answer. You could write it as negative 9r squared over r minus 4, or you could put the negative with the r minus 4, so you'd have 9r squared when this would change back to 4 minus r. And the other way would just put the negative out front. Don't make a double change. Don't put the negative out front and write that here. Okay, I think we have time for one more before the machine times out on me. Let's do a multiplication. Let's go to number 7. R squared plus 16r plus 60 over 1 times, and as you get good at this, you start to factor as you go. I'm just going to factor that as I go. So 10 times r minus 1, r squared plus 9r minus 10. Well, 5 and 2 don't give me 9. 10 and 1 do, so r plus 10, r minus 1. Just make sure it lines up. Negative 10, 10 minus 1. Yep. Now I just need to factor this. So when I'm looking over here, I'm going to see these r minus 1s cancel. I'm going to cheat factor. I think there's going to be an r plus 10 up here. That's why I'm going to... This is where guessing and checking, you may get faster at guessing and checking. If that's a 10, then this has to be 6. And so that those work out. Okay, so those cancel out. 10s, 1s, and all you're left with is 10 times r plus 6. So the last thing just to think about is you may see fractions like this sometimes. And that's the other way to see division. Again, you're multiplying by the reciprocal. One thing, I don't think it's on this assignment, you see it on some other assignments. One thing you may start to notice when you do go to multiply by the reciprocal is that you'll see the x and the 2x are reducing. You can actually do a shortcut by reducing there and reducing there. It helps you a little bit, maybe a little bit faster. So the only thing that changes on this assignment is the factoring gets a little more complicated. So you should be good to go on most of these problems. Reminders that if there's two terms, always try to factor out the GCF first, and then you can use difference of two squares. If there's three terms, you're probably going to use one of your quadratic factoring strategies for trinomials.